2022 meeting of the Morrisville Planning and Zoning Board. And now for the Pledge of Allegiance. All in favor? Aye. Agenda is adopted. Has anyone looked over the minutes? Do we have any corrections or changes? Do I have a motion?
Motion to adopt the minutes of the meeting.
All in favor? Aye. The minutes are approved. So we have the presentations here. Are we going to do? Are we jumping to new business? Really, there's no presentations outside of the. Okay. So, is there any general public comment not related to the tree protection ordinance? No. Okay, then Mr. Lawson can go ahead.
All right, thank you and good evening. Okay, so good evening again. So tonight we're going to discuss some proposed amendments to the Unified Development Ordinance. I believe at your last meeting or meeting before, I was up here kind of discussing some general ideas, some general themes, receiving feedback. Tonight we actually want to propose some specific language to this group. Slideshow does not have all the specific language in it. It's got more of the general ideas behind it, behind the proposed amendments. But they were an attachment in your package, and we can get into the specifics if you'd like to. Let me just keep going here. So we got several sections of the UDR proposed to have changes. Some are small, but some sections are pretty large scale, and those specifically are the tree preservation section and the common open space section. So staff have planned to present these items to the PZB at least twice to kind of discuss and just review these amendments. And I'll say that, at least from my perspective, we expect changes. We really want the PZB to get into it, to kind of give us your guidance, give us your thoughts, ask a lot of questions. We also realize there's going to be public comments. And so kind of I say that to note that, you know, at least staff expects changes to the language itself, and so I would say I'd ask you not to think of this as fully formed and that this has to be what goes forward, but to think of it as an in-progress text amendments. So again, looking for that feedback from this group tonight and at your June meeting. So just to recap kind of how we got here, you know, I told you last time I was before you that staff had conducted several online surveys, received some feedback, also held a forum with the development community in February. Received some good feedback from both the forum and the surveys, and those responses really helped craft some of the text amendments, or at least the general themes of them. And so I'm moving right along. You know, at the chairman's discretion, if you have any questions, please feel free to stop and ask or make comments anytime. So the amendments are broken into several sections just by the section of the UDO. So the first one is section 5.4, which is tree preservation. The slides are fairly lightly structured, and they discuss the current UDO standards, and then the next slide will discuss what's proposed, hopefully to give that good comparison back to back. So let's start with tree preservation. Again, this was a slide in the last presentation that I showed you, but it just discusses the town's local legislative authority that the state has granted the town specifically, as well as two recently proposed bills in the General Assembly, which would, if approved, would have limited in some aspect tree preservation across the state. The bill in 2018 would have completely removed any authority to require tree preservation. The bill last year in 2021 would have removed authority from towns without local legislation. But again, Morrisville does have local legislation to require some tree preservation. Either of these passes, that's correct. Okay, so kind of what I'll break down over the next few slides are really some of the major changes that are proposed to the tree preservation and tree protection section of the UDO. This is kind of the general, I guess, table of contents. So each bullet point will be covered in the next few slides, discussing what specific changes are made to these areas. So the first one is the rate of required preservation. So last time I was before this board, we went over how this current system set up. It's a bracket system. You work left to right. You find the existing tree cover on a development site. You then identify what type of development a developer is proposing, whether it be just a neighborhood or if it's some kind of commercial site. Commercial sites are on the far right. They require less tree preservation. The maximum would be 10% on a site that is 100% covered in trees. It is a bracketed system, so as the site is less covered in an existing tree canopy, the percentage gets higher. And that's how it's currently set up. So again, the neighborhoods are going to require more tree save. Anywhere someone's living is going to require more tree save. Currently, that's the way it's set up. So one of the ideas staff had pitched last time was maybe we should look at, as a town, just having a flat percentage across the board. There's a few reasons for this. The first and most basic one is just so that anyone that wants to develop in town, any member of staff that's reviewing a plan, knows automatically here's the exact percentage that's going to be required off the bat. So something I had heard when discussing with these ideas with some consultants, some civil engineers, was that they work in other towns, which they know is a flat percentage, and it just makes it easy. They can tell their clients moving when they first begin, this is already how much we know you're going to have to save. It's not dependent on a tree survey the way Morrisville's review system is currently set up. So if a developer is going to develop in Morrisville, the first step they have to do is a tree survey, and that's going to tell them how much of this site is covered in existing tree canopy, which then leads to how much of that tree canopy you actually have to save. So I guess I'm kind of working in a circle here, but long story short, staff is proposing a flat rate for a few reasons, most notably just to simplify it, to make sure everyone's on the same page at the very get-go of a plan's design and knows how much tree preservation is required. Compared if we kept the same regulations for these. So that's actually, I got it on my notes here. I should have explained why. So how do we reach these numbers? I'll explain that. So the way we reach these numbers as staff is, first off, we looked at some comparable communities just around western Wake County, Apex, Holly Springs, and Raleigh, and Cary. And then we wanted to propose a number that clearly, I think the goal was to save more trees, so we proposed a number that's higher than what's currently set. And just found that this is kind of comparable to other communities and also is higher than what the town currently requires. And to get to the direct answer to your question, one of your attachments did have like I'm gonna hold it up here, a small table comparing. I just went and pulled several plans from the last few years, ran the numbers, the percentage they actually had to require to save versus what would be required to save now, and every single one of them had to save more tree canopy than before. It really varied. The actual square footage saved varied greatly because if a site was not very much covered in trees previously, then it didn't have to save as many trees compared to the 15 or 20%. Long answer, yes. Okay. I will keep moving. The next slide also has some important information. So additionally, in changing the requirements from a kind of variable rate to a flat rate, staff was also proposing, or at least thinking about proposing, requiring new plantings if a site does not have the minimum tree save. So if a site's required to have 15% tree canopy, it only has 10%, the developer would be required to plant additional trees that would serve as additional tree canopy. I got an example at the bottom down there, just if I can let you read it. But essentially, if like I said, if a site doesn't have 15% tree save, you have to plant additional tree preservation to reach that 15%. And thinking about different ideas on how to reach this, Apex had a pretty good method for determining what trees need to be planted to save. So if you don't have existing tree canopy, it's hard to measure from a baby tree. So staff's proposing a certain amount of trees to be planted per square footage to replant them. Yes, sir.
So this requirement that if the land does not have the tree canopies to add more trees there, isn't it in a way penalizing for bad behavior in the past for future?
Is it penalizing the current property owner to have to plant more trees?
So
Say it again.
part of the reason why we are here is because in the past, right, all the developments that have been approved, resulted in more canopies being lost, right? Now let's say you are coming in, and if we are going to ask you to compensate the additional 5%, to me that's kind of penalizing you as a developer for the bad behavior of our history here.
So we are making stricter laws now because people in the past got away with more stuff. And is that really fair towards new developers?
Well, stricter laws is a different story, right? We are asking them to go beyond what exists there. Mm-hmm. So preservation is that this land has X amount of trees, and if you are going to build it, save those X amount of trees.
Well, and so the presentation I did for you last time, which I kind of just pitched general themes, I did the same thing to town council. Some of them did note that maybe that is unfair to make people replant, that if the trees aren't there, then is it really fair to make someone replant? So I didn't mention there's a cap put on how much you'd have to replant. It's 5%. So if the site's completely bare, you wouldn't have to take 15% of it and replant new trees. But if the board does not feel that it's fair to make people plant trees that aren't there in the name of preservation, that's something that can be removed. It could be taken completely away. It could be reduced. Number of options there.
Trying to develop a site, you know what's expected. So I think if obviously before it was a calculation, it's been money, do a survey, whatever. Right? The idea is you can kind of look at something. If you're buying a piece of land that was developed, it was logged, let's say previously, or was a farmland. I think there's still a few little bits of farmland here. At least going in, what those costs are going to be, so you can account for those. I think I see what you're saying about the previous ordinance, how that was a little difficult to sort of know going in, but obviously you go to a bare piece of land that I think most of the time a developer is going to be able to deal with it if they know what the rules are going in, right? That's the whole point. So,
yeah, and I'll say it. I think it almost sounds silly to say that a developer's got a piece of land and they're not sure where they can build on it because of the rules, but I would say that it happens quite often when you have a developer. Often they're out of town, but they've hired a local person to design the site. Developer's not sure how many trees are actually on the site, and even we aren't really sure how much until we get a tree survey done by a professional, looking at it. So, but yeah, the goal is to kind of get that.
I don't hate having to plant. Because I think if we looked at the comments last time, it is clear that, and if you just look at general comments, people do like tree canopy. They like trees. So I think people get benefits out of trees. So I don't think it's necessarily a bad thing as long as it's balanced, like you were saying. You don't want to make somebody spend a disproportionate amount of money, but I do think adding some trees in there, I don't think that personally for me sounds like a huge.
And that specific rate is. It's basically 2 large trees, 1 deciduous, 1 evergreen, 2 smaller trees, and then a few shrubs per every, I think it's 200 square yard, something like that. So.
Shrubs, in my view, is not a tree canopy, right? So, yes, shrub gives you greenery, but it doesn't give you canopy, right? So, if we really want to increase the the tree canopy, then you need to have requirement for them to plant trees that will grow into large ones.
Sure. So, in you bring that up, let me ask, because there's been a lot of discussion about this, about what types of trees should be required, what shouldn't be. Sometimes the value is on the tree themselves and the actual tree that'll grow 30 feet in the air, and sometimes there's a desire for having maybe trees that are shorter, shrubbery that's on the ground that may prevent, light pollution from car lights, things like that. So what, if you had to pick one, would it be the diversity in height, or would it be just the tree itself?
Depends upon where they are going to get planted, right? If you are expecting these trees to be, basically in front of, like in my house, they cleared the entire yard, put 2 small trees that died in about a year's time, right? To me, those are useless, right? Those don't give me canopy. But on my backyard, where there is buffer, there are huge trees that give me enough shade, right? So it is really dependent upon where these canopies are going to be required. If you count the trees planted in the front yard of a house as a tree canopy, to me, that doesn't work, because it won't grow into giving holistic canopy. Those will be like patchwork, one tree here, one tree there.
Yeah.
I'd like to comment. I think some of that detail is in the UDO and the strikeouts. And so if you go through that section, this is a good overview, but they did detail the selection of trees, the size of trees, the size of shrubs, staggering the trees with some shrubbery underneath it. So I think that detail's there. It's just not included in this presentation. I'm sorry, Chris, I didn't mean to speak on your behalf there.
No, that was very helpful. I'll include that detail next meeting for sure. All right, so where was I? Okay, so I guess generally what I'm hearing is that some level of replanting seems to be okay. Maybe the specific location and types of trees are still kind of up in the air somewhat. I'll move on to the next slide if that's all right with everyone. Okay, so again, back to current requirements, and this is the priority retention order. And I think I called this in the last presentation kind of what you have to save, what trees are required to be saved. So we know how much are at this point. Now we're trying to figure out which trees have to be saved. So current priority order is based on the type of tree. So you see on your slide, mature deciduous is the very first group of trees. Second one is a combination of mature deciduous and evergreen trees. Number 3, the third priority is specimen trees. What specimen trees means are just large trees that are 24 inches or bigger in caliber. So, and the fourth one is just any tree that does not meet the first 3 priorities. So if you don't have any of the first 3, you can go to 4 and you can save trees wherever they are on the site. So this is the current priority order. My professional view, I don't think this is the worst priority order, but we're going to recommend that we move away from this kind of order. And the reason for that is a few reasons. So the first and foremost reason is when you have an order like this, it's not dependent on the location of site. And so sometimes what happens is somebody comes in, they want to build something, and through a combination of some of our other requirements like setbacks, they need to build on a certain area of site, but that happens to be the one area of site where they have mature deciduous trees. So sometimes it really can make a site difficult to develop because those mature trees are right where the building needs to go. The next thing I'll say is from a staff perspective, we rely on the landscape architect, arborist, or forester to design these plans and to tell us where groups of deciduous trees are. So, for instance, right now there's a lot of development along the McCrimmon Extension Corridor, a lot of heavily wooded areas, very large tracts. Staff's not going out through the woods to look at the trees to confirm that those are where these trees are. So, essentially, we're, again, trying to make it more simple for both the developer, staff, but also still reach those town goals to move away from the types of trees towards the location of the trees on site. So, proposing changing the priority order to this priority order. So the first thing is trees located in an environmentally sensitive area. So this is wetlands, this is riparian buffers, could be flood zones, could be, those are the ones that are specifically listed, but it could be other environmentally sensitive areas. The second one is tree canopy that's adjacent to residential uses, adjacent to other preserved tree canopy on neighboring parcels. Really think that what we heard in some of the surveys was that residential areas are key for tree preservation. So this would be, for instance, maybe a commercial site required to save trees right next to a neighborhood. The tree save would need to be placed at a higher priority next to the neighborhood. The third one is sites that are next to sites that are zoned PGO. So that's parks, greenways, and open space. Next to greenways or next to railroad rights-of-way. So thoughts behind these: get groups of trees next to other areas that are hopefully going to have groups of trees that are zoned for parks and open space. We also have noticed that around town there are certain town greenways, great to use, but trees can be removed next to them if they're outside of that town-owned easement. So if you have a site where a greenway is going, just thought it was a good idea to help preserve trees around that greenway. So when you're walking down it, even if the greenway is it's developed adjacent to the greenway, you still have some trees next to it. And then number 4 is just kind of a catch-all. Anything that doesn't qualify, you still need to save it. Just the developer will kind of get to choose where it needs to go on site.
Question. So on the previous slide where you talked about trees that are in areas where you need to put in, it becomes a problem. Have we considered giving the builders the option to replant those trees from where they are to a different location? This way, you don't get rid of mature trees just because they are not in a convenient location, right? And move them, and there is technology already available, right, for moving large trees around.
So we do, and it's 2 or 3 slides past this. There is currently an option in which developer can come in, remove up to 49% of the required trees that are required to be saved, and replant them elsewhere. So, spoiler alert, we're gonna recommend that we get rid of that. That's in a few slides, but essentially what that does is it almost there's 2 things. So first off, it takes away mature existing trees for newly replanted trees, so that feeling of having mature trees and saving them and having that really mix of like bigger trees, smaller trees, taller trees, the mix of what diversity, that goes away. The second thing is the developers can then choose where they go. So they often end up going in like the landscape buffer that's already required, or some other area where it's essentially they were going to plant there anyway, and so they almost get to double dip in the system and build more and take away more trees.
I think what Sanjay was asking though, and I don't know if could you make that physically move those trees to a location or something, like take them up with a spade?
Oh.
Not necessarily planting new trees, but I don't know how.
There is
I don't
technology
know if that's
already
very
available.
economical though. I think you get more bang for your buck by planting new trees, but
Yeah, I think we could, and I think we could have some kind of bonding mechanism for several years afterward to make sure they survive. I don't.
It's hard to enforce. I understand that, but it's something to consider, because in Netherlands they do this all the time, right? They have machines that take the entire tree out and go plant it somewhere else, right?
Yeah.
The other comment or question part was, most of the developments that we see have large yards that are just lawns. Have we considered saying that you don't need to remove trees to just make lawns?
Is that for a lot? Would that be a neighborhood, or is that more of a commercial lot?
Neighborhood, or even commercial properties where they cut it down so that they can have a big lawn in front of them?
So for a neighborhood, for single-family homes, the town actually requires the tree preservation to be on a commonly owned space. So it wouldn't be on, in somebody's individual home. In part of the rationale for that is making sure those trees remain, and some homeowner that doesn't know you're not allowed to do this doesn't go out and tear down the trees. For some of the commercial sites that would have bigger, I guess, front yard areas, I don't know all the details, but kind of what we hear consistently is through the grading process, through installing all utilities, other infrastructure, it's just, at the end of the day, easier to remove the trees up front and get everything installed and plant new trees to grow back. But I wouldn't be able to speak to every situation.
Is there a desire to
Right here. Oh, back down. We could. Yeah, so essentially allow people to remove trees, but then replant them in this order. You got this one? Oh. Gotcha. I think so. And if I understand what you're saying, I think that's what we want. Doug, to be honest, I'm not sure if I understand exactly.
I don't know. Yeah, I mean, I don't know exactly.
I see. So yeah, essentially I was talking about almost double dipping. Just don't allow the double dip. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. I think there's yeah.
That's the number one priority. I kind of feel like we're giving them like I said, a free pass, because what were you going to do? And then sort of the other thing is, like, we're encouraging these trees around the outside of a site. And kind of what I brought up last time, like about McCrimmon Corners. There's all kinds of trees around that site, so much that you can barely see the shopping center now from Davis Drive. But driving around inside there really aren't any trees in the park. I mean, the trees are small. There's not a lot of trees in the park. There's not a lot of trees within the development that are, I think, what people experience as trees. And so we're ringing them around because of some of these things, but, like, does that give people the benefit when the average person goes by and says, wow, this is a great place, I love all these trees? They're not talking about the trees on the outside on the berm. Right? I mean, so that's the only problem with a lot of these, is that it's next to this. It's over in this area that we couldn't do anyway. And now then we have to balance that with making something that is slightly affordable to build. I mean, you can't just say you got to save a huge tree in a yard of every house, because almost any neighborhood that would be slightly affordable, like under $1 million, you couldn't do that. But so I don't know the exact right thing, but yeah. That's why I like having the trees planted maybe in a slightly different place, because if you're already saving it in one place, you want to plant them somewhere else. I mean, I think.
And that is exactly the point I was trying to make with the lawn question, etc. Because it is that, right? You can have on the buffers, but then when you are within the community, you don't see as many trees.
Right. And so.
Remind Morrisville, our local legislation does not allow us to require tree reservations attached or to those developments. We're talking about residential. We're talking about actually multifamily. Does that fall into the commercial category?
multifamilies with the townhomes. I think. Okay. So basically, we try to find a spot where real people are actually going to be able to experience the trees, not driving by at 55.
I mean, like the whole is the point to do it just to say we did, or is it to give the benefit to the people? I mean, that's.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
Well, and I think that goes back to, so my, oh, please.
I think that falls back to the
all good points, and I think if someone's going to replant trees, there's a little more flexibility than remaining trees there. And I think some other points that were made was earlier in presentations I had asked, you know, where's the real focus of where trees want to be saved? We'd heard environmental areas, we'd heard along roads, but I think kind of seems like the real answer we're fishing out is where people are actually going to be able to experience them.
I just wanted to add to the conversation about developers. I mean, I think we all realize developers, they're not in business to lose money, and so the more burdens that they have to add trees or to follow the UDO and hire their consultants to make sure they're doing everything by the book, and the more burden we put on them, the higher the cost of the project. They're not just going to, you know, quite frankly, they're not just going to eat that cost into their profits. Like, that's going to ultimately come back on the consumers, the residents, you know, in the form of rent or whatever fees to use the property. And so I think that's something we need to consider with the holistic argument of, you know, wanting more affordable housing and wanting to bring quality businesses and jobs into the community, what impact that's going to have as a ripple effect.
That was, but I mean, on the other hand, just saying, so there is
I think I got one more slide, two more slides in this section. So to get back to some more flexibility, so again, I gave the same presentation to this group that I gave it to town council. Some of the things I had heard was, well, there should be some potential for some flexibility. Two of the ways I think about flexibility are, there's two ways I can think about flexibility, probably more. The first way, though, is the town could reduce setbacks, could increase lot coverage, so the building, the parking lot, all the other hard infrastructure could be shifted around the site, and the town dictate we want these trees, those trees, or here. Another way to think about it, in my mind at least, is leave the setbacks, leave the lot coverage, leave the parking, all that other stuff, and just say, okay, we're not going to have a retention order. We're going to set a hard minimum cap on the number of trees you need to save, and then, but you as a developer, you choose where those go and build your product, according to our other standards. Those are two. I'm sure there's other ways for flexibility. Those are two of the ways that I think about it in my mind. And again, this is something I'd asked, I think, last time was, are there other priorities that the town really doesn't have? What does the town really prioritize? Is it setbacks, lot coverage? Is it the trees up front, out back? Should that control even be there of where the trees need to be saved? So these are other things that I'm thinking about and also looking for feedback from the board on. It doesn't have to be right now, but. All right, so I have one more slide in this section. So there's various other tree amendments proposed. The first one is just the complete removal of the option to reduce or modify required tree protection percentage. So currently the UDO allows development to remove up to 49% of the required tree protection just as a by right use. So there's nothing town staff have to approve, town council, this board, developer can just propose it. It's not quite as simple as that. They have to document every tree that's being removed, replace each tree with at least one tree, and then the total caliper inches removed has to be replaced on site. But again, staff's just proposing removing that completely. Staff is proposing we add what's called an administrative adjustment that would allow 5 percentage points in reduction of tree, either save or replacement or replanting. So an administrative adjustment is it's kind of what it sounds like. It's an application to the planning director. An applicant lists the reasons they feel they should be granted this administrative adjustment. The reasons that they're supposed to be granted are listed in the UDO. There's 4 or 5 reasons. Generally, it's if there's severe environmental problems, severe grade change, maybe something that creates an unsafe condition, things like that. So it's not just we want to do it, it's an application that actually goes before the planning director and is reviewed against the standards listed in the UDO. And so that's my section on tree preservation. Let's stop right now and just look if there's any question. Okay, not see any. I'll move on to
And I don't want to do, but
And I'm trying to think because I don't think we've ever used that, but there are options. So if someone does want to remove or reduce trees, like this first sub-bullet point here, they can replace those on other lots within town. In practicality, does that work? Not usually, because we have one person who's got a contract on one specific lot, and that's what they want to build. I actually don't remember if it's. I don't think currently that the UDO has, if you have to save 10% of your trees, you can save them somewhere else. I think it's on that site.
Because one person buying land, they can make millions off of just letting other people plant trees.
Right, one very heavily wooded lot. Yeah. All right, so I don't see anything else. Move on to 5.5. 5.5 is common open space. So again, common open space, I've said before, I think the name's a little misleading. It's not necessarily just blank open space. It is space proposed to be used for some kind of recreation, some kind of a sitting area, a formal garden, maybe a gazebo on site, something like that for the development's users to be able to get outside, be able to have some kind of active or passive recreational space. So currently required with all development except for recreational spaces, public parks, things that are already fairly open. Broad range of allowable current uses. So the UDO allows common open space can count under a utility easement if overhead power lines are there. It can count for a stormwater pond if it's designed to be used as an amenity. It can be natural resource areas. It can be a bench. It could be a gazebo. It could be other things like that. So that's what's currently required, and again, it's required with all development, except for recreational spaces. So, proposal. I think I talked last time. Common open space sometimes does not work for every single development. So often the things we hear are industrial areas where heavy trucks are going to be coming and going. Is that really what common open space should be used for, or is that where it should be targeted? Other sites that we've had a lot of pushback on common open space are banks. I think I talked about this last time. Want people to be using the ATM and leaving, or doing their business at the bank and leaving, not kind of hanging around a bank. Heard it for some other uses too, but essentially the amendments that are proposed are targeted at larger sites, so they have to be at least 5 acres in size. At the same time, staff's proposing to really limit the usable area. So currently, like I said, common open space could be a stormwater pond. It could be under one of those electrical lines that's kind of high in the air. The thought behind this is increase the size of development that has to provide open space, and then really focus the use to usable areas. Really thinking outdoor dining areas, actual recreation areas, squares, plazas, gazebos, any site that's actually really not only big enough to have a number of people coming and going to it, but also really focus that on usable space. So instead of a bank providing some benches outside, get more of a larger office park and actually have them build something that can be used. Don't know if I explained that very well, but that's kind of the trade-off there. So not required every site, but require it to be higher quality on larger sites. Okay. The last bullet point is just allow some of the common open space to be reduced by up to 50% if that percentage is translated into tree preservation. Okay. Keep on moving. Next is perimeter buffers, and this is specifically landscaping buffers. Not yes, if you're going to use it specifically for common open space, the way we're proposing the amendments to go, it would not, the trees would be removed for the most part. It can still be some kind of actual formal garden. I think that's one of the uses that's still allowed. But yes, the trees would be removed in lieu of, that outdoor usable space. They have to be removed? No, but
that is a usable common open area, but it is in a sort of tree. It isn't like you saying, they just cut the trees all down. So there's kind of almost like a dual benefit there.
Right. So the goal would not be to force people to remove trees, but if they were going to build a hard plaza with a water fountain in the middle or something, then they would have to. But yeah, if there was a volleyball court, if there was some kind of outdoor space like that. So move on to perimeter buffers. This refers to landscape buffers along the streets, along property lines, things like that. So not a lot proposed to change, but probably the biggest two changes are on your slide now. These are to essentially along street yards, so along the street section of a piece of property. We had discussed a lot about requiring some of the tree preservation area maybe to remain in that area or not. Something we found that Town of Cary does require 6-inch trees along a street yard buffer. So this would not require every single tree in the front of the property to remain, but it would require some of those larger trees. That number of the 6 inches could be adjusted. It could be made larger if you feel it's too small. It could be shrunk if you feel it's too big. But essentially, within that street yard buffer, which is generally 20 or 30 feet from the edge of the road, any trees that are larger than 6 inches or larger would have to remain. and they would count towards some of the street yard buffer requirements. The second largest change is an attempt to allow existing trees to remain and not be removed. So if you have a site that's heavily wooded and you can dedicate existing tree canopy that's twice the width of a buffer, you don't have to survey it, you don't have to give any other indication except for kind of an aerial image in that measurement that it's double the width of the required buffer. So that would leave that existing tree canopy there.
Where there could be, that could spark, I mean, it would be nice to have, but yeah. But then that also sort of is more of an actual tree on that edge instead of that sort of planted, like weird, so yeah, I don't know the best way around that.
So let me ask, if you sound undecided, is that something that
Well, I mean, I'm
sounds
just
desirable?
thinking, I can see where there could be some issues where if you did have some interesting topography on the site and you had to save those 6-inch trees, I mean, you can't regrade that unless somebody. And so, I mean, I can see where there's benefits of that, but I can see some drawbacks. I don't know how the balances, would work on that either. But
Yeah, and it's not requiring additional trees saved, but it is requiring additional area that cannot be graded. But
what if it's
so
on the
what?
street yard buffer? It's going to have to be by the street. I mean,
Right. Yeah, and a physical example of this, if you leave tonight or tomorrow and want to look at it, is if it's actually in town of Cary. If you go south on Chapel Hill Road, right where it hits, I think it's Maynard. There's the State Police Credit Union there. There's a new apartment complex under development in Cary that has trees kind of lining the road, and that could be like a visual example if you happen to be in that area. Okay. Other slide about perimeter buffer. This section, I'll say, is still kind of, we're tweaking this section. So something called green stormwater infrastructure. Essentially, instead of a stormwater pond, there are a range of other measures which can be, doesn't have to be one giant stormwater pond. It can be distributed throughout a site. Currently, landscape buffers don't allow any hard infrastructure within the buffer unless it runs kind of at a 90-degree angle. Looking at ways that the town can allow green stormwater infrastructure to be placed within a landscape buffer while also trying to protect the trees, so that if something has to be replaced within this in 15 years, a nice mature tree doesn't have to be removed, but also still allow this. So I've got some information on the slide. This is still being tweaked around with not only planning but other departments in the town trying to figure out the best way to implement this.
so it's kind of like a rain garden, like on the edge of a parking lot where it filters through, and then there's the storm drain, like at the end of it. Correct? I've seen.
Yeah.
It.
Yeah. So yeah, exactly. And I'll try to get some pictures of this next time. What's next? So landscaping is the last section, 5.12. I think I only have one slide for this one. Not a lot of proposed amendments. Landscaping essentially captures a lot of the size and height requirements for the other trees, so for perimeter buffers, things like that. Currently, shrubs, various sections of the UDO require different heights of shrubs. Again, trying to get that consistency, we're just pitching 36 inches. I think 36 inches is an appropriate height. I think that those types of shrubs can be provided easily enough. And then foundation plantings aren't always required currently. So if a site's designed so that a parking lot essentially runs into the sidewalk, which runs into the building, there's no foundation plantings required. Tweaking that language so that in most of the zoning districts, besides the Main Street area and the transit-oriented area, that foundation plantings are going to be required between a parking lot, parking lot runs into the sidewalk, which then runs into the foundation plantings, which then the building starts after that. And that is...
What are the sizes that are contemplated for these foundation plantings?
So foundation planting has to be at least, the bed itself has to be 3 feet wide. The shrubs have to be 36 inches at time of planting. Yeah, same thing. Yep.
I mean, because you do often see, and this is a commercial and residential, where people, if you're you're required to plant things right by the building, and then you got to be super careful about what plants you select because it ends up looking bad and it's on top of the building, it's touching the building, which isn't really good for. There's a lot of reasons why you don't want your plants to touch your buildings. I mean, so I can see where, that looks good if it's well maintained and it's thoughtfully done.
Well, and again, a lot of this is done for consistency. Some of it's done just to require better plants that we hope will survive a little better. But these numbers that are proposed anywhere within this, I
don't know the number. Have you seen what I'm talking about? It's a very typical sort of, but I guess if you're not requiring trees there, that will help. But the shrubs, I guess 36 inches is not very high. And I guess we have to rely on the developers to have someone pick the correct plants that aren't going to get to be 8 feet tall if they don't want them that tall. But
I will say 36 inches is going to be higher than a lot of the shrubs you'll find that are planted new today. It will be somewhat of a size difference, but
I don't know if there's some reduction. I don't know if that makes that much difference.
Yeah.
Well, 18 inches obviously is half of 36, but nothing you buy is going to stay 18 inches forever. So.
Right. Well, and I'll say that the trees we found in the last year or so, developers have a hard time finding the trees of a certain size, but shrubberies we haven't really had as much of as phone calls saying we can't find these trees. What do we do? And we recently hired someone that's got more of a specialty in plants. She said, these type of shrubs aren't as hard to find. They're plenty available, and that's kind of how we got with that 36. All right. PZB comments and questions.
Yes.
I also want to. Sorry, if I could. I just want to remind you we have those public comments that are in too.
So let's do.
Wagner, and I live at 112 Indian Overlook Court here in Morrisville. I'm also, just for transparency, I do work in land development as well. I'm a registered landscape architect in several states, North Carolina being one of them. So I just had a couple of questions for clarification for you. When you were talking about the total tree preservation and that only 5% would be required for the replanting, do I understand that as saying if the total site was, say, 8%, that at post-construction you would only need 13% for tree preservation? Is that what you're intending there? Perfect. I also had a question if there was any consideration for, say there was land clearing that needed to happen for grading purposes, as we talked about a moment ago. Is there any sort of metric for if we needed to remove a tree for some reason, that there would be an allowance or a justification for you could plant it, but you would need to plant 1.2% or 125% more tree back, something like that. For example, if I had to remove a 10-inch caliber tree, we'd have to replant 7 trees in order to reach that sort of metric. Is that any consideration for a unique situation like what was talked about here with the street trees, that sort of thing?
I don't want to respond, but thinking through all the text we wrote, I don't think we've written anything like that, though a lot of that feedback from someone like yourself, landscape architect, would be very helpful. If you want, and we can talk tomorrow or next day or whatever.
Sure. And then the one last thing that I had was, you put out the number of the 6-inch tree in the street yard, and I feel like from a residential perspective as well as working in the industry, that might be a little bit challenging because to the point that Mr. Kappen made, the more restrictive you put on some of these developers, the more their pro forma is going to increase and therefore rents are going to increase and that sort of thing. So just wanting to consider maybe a little bit larger size for that, because it does pose quite a bit of challenges for those of us that are trying to, every developer wants to put the kitchen sink on a site, right? And it can pose a few challenges when you have a limitation that can be that stringent for is a maturing tree, but it's certainly not a mature tree for that smaller size. And then can you clarify with the existing buffer, the point that you made a minute ago about showing the proof that it's there, that it has to be two times the width that's there? Does that mean that if we were to prove that there is where there's a required 20-foot buffer, that there was 40 foot of buffer there, that you could clear that additional 20 feet? Or would you say that you would be preserving that entire 40?
Yeah, I'm trying to think of a project you worked on that might have had this, but I don't think you have. But essentially, the way we look at tree preservation now is from an aerial view. We look at the canopy itself, generally when trees are in bloom. What we would do is take, a site that's heavily wooded. You as a site designer would have to show the measurement of a full 40 feet. Let me back up a little bit. The buffer requires 20 feet. You would need to prove that there's 40 feet. The way I'd envision that is we'd use an aerial perspective and some kind of measurement that you'd provide, and we could look at and confirm as staff.
Right. I guess my question comes to, if we proved that it was there, are you intending that 40 feet stay in place post-development?
Yeah, so
Okay.
that 40 feet would replace any need to survey the trees
Sure.
and replant, add
Sure.
shrubs, anything like
Sure.
that.
I just wanted to make sure that there wasn't, you're proving that it's there, but now you only need to keep 20 feet without doing any survey. I wanted to ensure that I was clear in that if I proved that there was 40 feet, that 40 feet would stay intact.
It would. And if you guys don't, let me explain that a little first. So if there's a site that's heavily wooded now and a landscape buffer is required, for instance, there was a neighborhood that was built, it was right along 540, it was a large wooded lot, the developer still needed to provide a landscape buffer. Even though they wanted to keep the existing trees, the UDO was set up so they had to document what trees are out there, and if there were not a certain size of tree at a certain spacing, those had to be supplemented. In this case, shrubbery was required, and we heard, well, the shrubs aren't going to really do very well in a really heavily wooded area, so they had to plant the shrubs elsewhere. The intent is to let existing trees remain, but to still give enough of that buffer, especially at the lower, mid, and higher levels. So, thanks.
That was all I had. Thank you. I appreciate it.
Thanks. sketch. So let me explain the 1,200 feet and the minimum width. So essentially, in part to make it so I think the tree preservation that's preserved, the trees that are preserved is of better quality or size, and also an attempt to help staff regulate it, wanted to put two-dimensional standards on. The first one is a minimum square footage of tree canopy, which is grouped together. The second one is to have a minimum size. So when I'm looking at a plan that's submitted, sometimes you have these like tails that go down like this into almost nothing, and that's our tree canopy. Right? The trees don't grow like that. That's not possible. So wanted to have some kind of just minimum dimensional standards. The numbers could be adjusted, but just to have for clarity. The second part with the 20 by 60, embarrassed to admit, I think we left that in when we were looking at different ideas, and we just happened to leave the 20 by 60 in. I think that was when we were still kind of looking at ideas to preserve trees along the street yard, and we had those standards in for that reason. Does anybody else remember that? No? Okay, I'll just stick with it. I think, yeah. Said architectural design feature. Was there one other one? Okay. Gotcha, that makes sense. To clarify that it needs to be installed with the development, not. Understood. Thank you.
Expert in tree preservation and all of that, but I just listening to the comments submitted through emails and to the lady in the audience, I think there are some valuable inputs that we can use to balance the demands on development while preserving the tree canopy, right? So it's all the things that we talked about where to try and achieve a balance, and we should aim for that.
Thank you for the thoughtfulness of the presentation and everything you put together. I really appreciate the thoughtfulness and the public comment as well.
I was already sort of wondering about the 6-inch too. I mean, I do wonder if maybe you could increase the size of that a little bit, and it might make it a little bit easier to kind of comply with the spirit of what they're talking about. And I looked up what he was talking about, the DBH, which is, I'd never heard of that before. So I guess that's what they call diameter of breast height, which is essentially 4.5 feet off the ground, versus caliper being 12 inches off the ground. So, and it did, at least the thing that I did see seemed to say that that was the proper way to measure an existing tree. So I don't know if that's something we would want to change also.
Yeah, and I could go over that next time a little more, but yeah, the 6 inches again, that's just, I think that's what Carrie uses, and if it larger trees are what's valued, then we can certainly increase it. The specimen tree, what the town defines it as, is 24 inches. Those are your
that's
pretty large trees.
Yeah. But it's a lot of work, so it's very good. Thank you.
Thank you.
Anything else? All right, that's it. Staff comments.
I was like, she's going to read all these pages.
But you did.
Thank you. Have a good one.